Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How is everyone doing? I know it's bleak. I know that every conversation that you have with a friend, a loved one, just small talk at the supermarket, I know every conversation contains the word bleak. And I don't have anything that will solve that. I will say this. I had been prepared to not be so cynical or pessimistic in this intro. I was all prepared to talk about how it's lovely that my cat Crumbles is into hugs. I don't know if he likes being hugged, but he certainly lets me hug him, which I've never really been able to do to a cat. They're generally not big huggers. They like to be pet, they like to be scratched, they like to sit on you. So I was all prepared to say something nice about that. Then I shut the door to my office so I could record this, and then I glance over and I see Crumbles is playing with something, and I run to see what it is, and it is a noble false widow that was just hanging out in the corner of the office. And when I shut the door, then suddenly he started to scramble, and that caught Crumbles' eye. And I don't think they're deadly. They're definitely not to humans. I don't think they're deadly to animals in general, but I didn't want to take the chance. So I ran over and I smashed it. But it made me think about how in California there's basically spider season. There's basically a season when, they're all breeding. Like if you go up and down our block right now, there's black widows everywhere. And there was one on the corner of our driveway the other day. And I'm just like, I can't have this near the house. Especially with 3 animals that will just play with spiders. But here's the thing. I happened to see the film Arachnophobia at a formative age. And it's stuck in my brain ever since. So even though I was about to say 10 times the size of a black widow. Way more than that times the size of a black widow. In my brain, I'm thinking, okay, I'm about to go stomp on this thing. It's going to jump on me and bite me. And it's so powerful that it will bite me through my clothing, and then I'm dead. So I went to go stomp on this black widow, and I stomped on it so hard that I ended up hurting my foot as I slammed the spider into the concrete. So that's how I've been doing. I guess I would categorize it as weird and paranoid. But do you know what makes it all better? Why? It's doing the interviews, it's having these conversations on Beginnings. And today is no different because today I am talking to Matthew S. Who is Matthew S? Well, why don't I read you his bio right now? Originally from Fresno, California, musician and academic Matthew S. founded the sample-based label Illegal Art in 1998 and ran it under the pseudonym Philo T. Farnsworth for 15 years. In that time, Illegal Art released music from Touch People, Junk Culture, and perhaps the most acclaimed of the roster, Girl Talk. In 2012, Matthew shut the label down to concentrate on his own music and work as a college professor. But this year, he has decided to bring it back, and the first release is his own project, Myth Math. Their debut EP, Tongues, just came out last week, and folks, it is excellent. I knew about Illegal Art primarily because of Greg, because of Girl Talk. I knew Greg back in Pittsburgh. In fact, he's on a very early episode of Beginnings. And as you hear in this episode, the idea behind sample-based music always intrigued me. I mean, there's a lot of it that's fantastic just aesthetically. But intellectually, it always intrigued me. And Matthew's album as Myth Math is really great. So I thought, okay, I'd love to have him on the show. But here's the thing that kind of worried me. For all of the first stint of Illegal Art, he ran it under a pseudonym. And even now, he performs professionally as Matthew S. He doesn't use his last name. And the kind of anonymity and pseudonymity that he hid behind worried me a little bit, and I wondered if we were going to have, I wonder what kind of conversation we were going to have. And it turns out Matthew's very open, and we really get into it. We get into his childhood. We get into being raised Mormon and what that meant spiritually, what that meant aesthetically, and a ton of other stuff. I hope you like this episode. It was really wonderful talking to Matthew. Before we get into it, though, I just wanted to tell you about a couple upcoming episodes. Very excited. Danny Bessner from the American Prestige podcast is going to be on, I think, next week. Blockhead, incredible hip-hop producer. His new album with Brian Ennals comes out today. I guess if you're downloading this the day it comes out. I'm so excited for that. That was a great talk. Josh Olson, screenwriter, who wrote A History of Violence. Hutch Harris of the Thermals, David Rees, so many other people that are wonderful. So stay tuned for those. But for now, let's talk to Matthew. Wait, before we started recording, you said you like meditation, and you also alluded to therapy. Are you a therapy and meditation person? Just a meditation person? What's the mental health combo?
That's a really good question. So, I didn't discover some of these things till later in life. Like I think most people, I just kind of went through, most of my years, just kind of like on autopilot or whatever, not really, like going inward at all. Mm-hmm. And so I found meditation to be very useful to kind of go inside of myself a little bit more. And, I find it, it doesn't always work. It doesn't always click. Sometimes you just get bored or your mind's too restless or whatever the case may be. But when I'm able to get into that sort of meditative zone, it feels very peaceful. And, one thing that I've discovered through that, and then subsequently through therapy that took a little bit longer for me to kind of lock into, is that, and I don't know if this maps to, I don't know what percentage of the population this maps to, but I began to recognize that my nervous system was in kind of a constant state of, sort of alertness, of performing and trying to do things and, just always task oriented. And so through, sort of meditation and some different therapy modalities, I've kind of, and I'm still working with this now, some of this is relatively new. I'm learning to kind of put my nervous system at ease and, kind of find like, rest or, for my nervous system, not be in that sort of fight or flight, sort of, state of being that I think a lot of people in sort of, like a very production oriented capitalist society are in that mode for quite a bit.
Yeah, for sure.
And then being at a university, since I work at a university, that's very much the mode there as well. Achieving, also being evaluated constantly, and then evaluating my students, so we're constantly like raising the bar, trying to raise the bar and trying to establish ways of measuring how we're doing and how we're learning and all that. Yeah,
that feeds back into some things I've been thinking about this morning when I was imagining talking to you. There's a lot of clauses and verbs in that sentence, but I think it's followable.
Yeah.
But before I get to that, I am curious a little bit about this kind of like fight or flight mode. Do you think it is solely from being a citizen in a like hyper-capitalist society, or is that just like the main thing you're kind of trying to therapize out of you?
For me personally, going to sort of the hyper-capitalist society is kind of the easy explanation, but for me personally, it also relates to growing up in a fairly rigorous religious culture, and so growing up in a religious culture where you're either a good person or a not so good person, and so that's kind of the metric that you're given, and so I'm obviously trying to be a good person. I don't want to be in the other category.
Sure.
And so I think that really gets ingrained in certain religious cultures. And so, and I think one thing that I discovered about the religious culture that I grew up in was that it really wasn't this pure, untainted thing that had been, handed down from above, and that it was very much just a reflection of our society. So then we get back into, it's still very Western. It's still very capitalist, even if it's clothed in other, semantics or whatever. It still can't escape, all the constructs of society and so then we go back to, hypercapitalism or whatever. So
Yeah. Okay, I want to get back to this too, but I want to close the loop on some of the meditation stuff. Are we talking TM? What kind of meditation are you doing?
Various things. Most recently, a lot of my meditation is just sort of sitting, and quieting my mind and just kind of, just sitting without any intent. And then before that, if you go back 6 months, I really got into a form of meditation called Yoga Nidra.
Okay.
And that's a kind of meditation, and it's a more guided meditation. So, you're listening to a recording of someone talking, and that form of meditation is really interesting. And I don't even know if they call it meditation or what they call it. But in that form of meditation, you definitely go into like a different state of being where your body just really relaxes. It guides you through different things. Like, one of the things it does is you kind of track your body. And as you track your body, different parts of your body start to relax. And so then you go into kind of like sometimes I would just fall asleep. It puts you kind of, like if you're tired and you do some of these forms of meditation, you just go to sleep, which is not a bad thing. If you need sleep, you need sleep.
Yeah.
But when I either don't go to sleep or sometimes I just can't turn my mind off, and I just can't get anywhere. So when I don't go to one end of the spectrum or the other end of the spectrum, and I land kind of in that sweet middle spot, it can actually be really, it's like you go to a place that's just super blissful and just feels really good. And your mind just feels very clear, and all your concerns and worries, just kind of dissipate. And you just feel like, oh yeah, this is the way I'm supposed to be.
Huh.
And so, the more I get in touch with that sort of, like what, the state that I think we're actually supposed to be in, where we're just kind of calm and we're, just not as frenzied mind as we tend to be. It's a beautiful thing. And I would love to eventually, kind of just be there all the time.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. I think when I try to do that kind of stuff, whether it's meditation, whether it's, I can get to, I think what you're saying, maybe like in a 10% way when I do like yoga or something like that. There is something that feels so unnatural about, as natural as that is, the state you're talking about, how this is like where we should be. Growing up in the world we grew up in, it feels so unnatural that it takes getting used to. And I'm wondering, did you immediately take to it?
Probably not. Because I've kind of gone in and out of some of these things for years, over, probably at least 15 years at this point. And I kind of go, and I've explored lots of different practices, and I'm always trying new things, which is probably not the best approach. You should probably just kind of settle on one thing and get really good at it. But it's my nature. But going back to what you were talking about, and I'm not a therapist, so I don't really have, like the background to really speak to what you're talking about. But I've heard enough that I think what's happening when you feel uncomfortable is that, the reason why our nervous system goes into these, sort of like more heightened states that we're often in is that it's trying to protect us.
Mm.
And so it's trying to serve us in a good way, because it senses fear out in our world, and we create all these fears in our minds and everything. And so some of those fears are pretty unfounded in our current culture, because we're not, really under attack. We're not really in danger of our lives being cut off at any moment. But we kind of live that way. And so our nervous system is trying to protect us from what our minds or our bodies perceive as threats, externally. Whether it's a deadline that we're up against, or in my case, I have to face, like a room of 30 students, and so our nervous system is protecting us. And so when that protection starts to go away, your nervous system you feel uncomfortable because your nervous system wants to still protect you, is my understanding. And I'm sure someone in that field could speak more eloquently to that, but that's kind of my understanding of why, you kind of feel that discomfort, is because you're so used to being protected that when those protections kind of start to fade, it can cause, sort of that feeling of discomfort.
Yeah. It's almost as if like I keep piling on and writing to-do lists and buying more books and albums as a way to keep the feeling going.
For sure, yeah.
I have to, I finished this book. Well, now I have this other book to read and these 30 other books waiting in the wings. And like, okay, I listened to this album. Well, now instead of like when I was a kid and I listened to Crooked Rain all summer, well, I'm going to listen to this album once and now I'm going to listen
That's Pavement, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just remember this one like summer between, I think, 8th and 9th grade. That's literally all I listened to all summer.
Yeah. And that kind of highlights, this is kind of an extension of the hypercapitalism, is just that we're in this sort of like information saturated environment now. And so we feel this need to constantly consume new things and, be on top of all the information that's out there on whatever the topic is. And so that's, we just keep inventing ways to make our lives more complicated, it seems.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me go back to some of the stuff that we set up earlier, because I think this all kind of flows into each other. The one fact I was able to find out about you online was that you went to Brigham Young, if that is correct.
That is correct, yes.
So did you grow up in Utah?
No, I grew up in California, but I grew up in Mormonism.
Where in California?
Fresno.
What's Fresno like? I've only heard it as a place, like where people are. Like, I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, so one thing to understand about California is that when most people think of California, they think of the coast. Mm-hmm. But California is huge, and once you go inland, it's a very different experience. Climate-wise, it's not as favorable. And so Fresno is really hot in the summer, and in the winter, it's in the San Joaquin Valley. So there's a lot of agriculture there, but it's very populated at the same time, so it doesn't feel like you're, like in the fields or anything. It's a pretty big city, so it's very hot in the summer, and then in the winter you get this inversion, and so you can also go weeks on end in the winter without seeing the sun, because the smog and fog just kind of gets caught in the valley. And so it's not the most pleasant place to be. It's kind of like the summers are bad, the winters are bad.
Yeah.
and then it's also Fresno, and this is my memory of it. I haven't been back for a while because my parents moved to Southern California after I left. But it's a very segregated city. So I remember growing up, and there was, my high school was the white high school, and there was another high school that was the Hispanic high school, another high school that was the black high school. And in fact, when I was approaching high school, we were going away from mandatory busing. So there was a busing program in California at the time where in 9th grade, all the white kids got bused over to the black high school. and so they were phasing that out, and they started creating what they called magnet schools.
Right.
And so they actually created a middle school called Computech. And I think it was 8th grade I went to Computech because I was interested in computers. And so I voluntarily was bused over to the black neighborhood and went to a school called Computech. And so that's, and Fresno, some other things about Fresno, I think the crime rate's really high. I remember, like, I don't know if this is always true, but, certain years, it'd be like, Fresno is, the carjacking capital of the world. It's like we have the highest rate of carjacking than anybody, that kind of stuff. So a lot of diversity, but very much in pockets.
Right. Yeah. I wonder if that's like a California thing in general. My wife and I moved here in 2017 from New York, and we noticed just how segregated LA is.
Yeah.
Like, we moved to Hollywood, Franklin Village, I think you would call it. And, like, in New York, everyone is, like, everywhere. Like, every ethnicity, we're all together. And there, obviously there's, like, different neighborhoods and things like that, but it's more class segregated than anything else. And here is very much just, like, I don't know, you would go weeks without seeing, like, a single black person on the street. Like, it was like, it was that kind of segregated.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember being so isolated, like in my neighborhood for most of my life that I didn't realize how good I had it. I just thought this is how everybody lives. And I also didn't realize how well off my family was. Because my parents would deny me certain things. They'd be like, "Oh, well, you can't have, the shirt that has the crocodile on it. We're going to get you Le Tigre instead, Le Tigre or whatever it's called instead." And so I thought, oh, we're poor, but much later, I realized, oh, we were like, way above, average as far as, like income and opportunity and the size of our house and everything, but it's that closed off that you just don't even know, even though these things are probably, like just a short car ride away, you're just so insulated in your neighborhood, that you don't even know where your class position is,
Was that a religious thing? Like they were trying to instill some kind of moral value in you? Was it a frugality thing? What was going on?
Potentially, yeah, definitely a frugality thing, which may have stemmed from the religious culture as well. It's hard to say, but also, I grew up in a family of 5 children, and so that impacts everything, and also a family where only my father, only one parent's working, and so even though my dad had, I'm imagining a great income, there's still sort of this sense that, oh, well, compared to the next door neighbors who only have 1 or 2 kids and maybe both parents work, it's everything's relative. Maybe it seemed like we didn't have, quite the resources, or maybe we had to save up for whatever reason, that may have had to do with the religion or not. I'm not sure.
Mm. How did your parents end up in Fresno? Were they from California? Did they move there for a job? What happened?
My parents are from Southern California in, do you know West Covina?
Yes, I know where West Covina is.
Okay. Yeah. So
like 45 minutes west of me.
Yeah. So they both grew up in that area, and they met in high school, and I think my dad just came here for a residency. So he went to dental school and became an oral surgeon, which is why earlier I said, of course he must have had a good salary, good income. But I think it was just opportunity. And then I remember, like my whole life, growing up, it's like, oh, we're going to move to the coast. We're going to move to the coast. That was always but my dad had a practice there, and it was really hard to, just sort of like sell a practice and start up a new practice somewhere else. And so they stayed there until he retired. For the first time, he retired once, and then when they moved, then he started working again and then retired again.
I'm looking up Fresno right now. I want to see where it is on the map. Let's see here.
It's like 3 hours east of San Francisco.
Oh, it's like north. For some reason, I'm imagining like Inland Empire type stuff. No. Oh, it's so far up.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The coast was like Santa Cruz.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
I remember going to Santa Cruz quite a bit.
Oh, wow. Okay. So because I didn't, there's that Pavement song, Two States, not to keep referencing Pavement, but like there's that Pavement song, Two States, which I was just like, yeah, that's a fun song. I didn't kind of get that there is a difference of culture in Northern California versus Southern California. It's also like, it is like, when I think about that, I'm like, I'm so bad at geography, but I'm like, oh, well, yeah, Utah, Nevada, like that's like ranging and over there. I see how this all fits together. I see what the migration patterns were like in terms of of like, people moving in the 1800s and wagons and that kind of thing. I get it now. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So
yeah, and if you've been to Bakersfield, it's a lot like Bakersfield, I think.
Okay. Here's what we look. Going back to kind of that feeling of like, oh, you have to keep doing stuff and you have to always be busy in this world that we live in this hyper-capitalist, necro-capitalist. So many kind of modifiers for the word capitalist can be used to describe the 21st century. But like in this world, like we moved to LA and you basically have to like keep getting different gigs to stay afloat.
Yeah.
Our dog goes to the vet all the time. And you got to pay those vet bills. They won't give you when you take your dog to the vet, they won't bring your dog back until you pay the bill. They like hold the dog hostage.
Yeah, that's great.
So you got to keep doing stuff. So we barely ever, like, we'll take a vacation to Palm Springs, or once we went up to Solvang and over there. So we have not really. And the only time we've ever been to like San Francisco has been to do comedy.
Oh, yeah.
So we've never really explored California, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think Fresno or Bakersfield are destination points.
You don't think I should go to the carjacking capital of the United States?
Yeah, I don't know what you would do if you went to Fresno as a tourist.
Enjoy the smog? Like when you said that, I was just like, oh yeah, because there's here in LA, there's something called like June gloom, where in June it's a little like hazy and it's very nice. It's lovely and overcast in the mornings in a lot of June, and I thought of that, but then you were just like, the way that you made it seem more sinister.
Yeah. It was what it was, though.
It's a very polite way of putting it. So, Dad was an oral surgeon. You made it sound like your mom was in charge of the household, which seems very Mormon to me from what I understand.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there were periods of time where she worked in my dad's office, but for the most part, she was a stay-at-home mom.
How devout was your family? Was it more of a like, hey, this is, we go to church once in a while? Or was it like, no, we follow all the dictates of Mormonism?
Yeah, it was more we follow all the dictates, yeah. Very, very committed. Very much, part of our identity.
Were you on the rolls? Isn't that a thing? Sorry, I have like a lot of friends who are former Mormons, so I've like picked up a little bit of stuff. But like, isn't there like a thing in the church in Salt Lake City, like on the rolls or something like that?
On the rolls, yeah. And I'm technically still a member. You'd have to request to have your name removed, which is something I haven't done. I don't see any reason to do it. They can count me if they want to, but yeah, it's a very devout. One of the terms people use is it's a high demand religion, and so it really, compared to, and I have only minor experiences with other Christian, and some people don't call Mormons Christians, so and I don't really care about that debate, but. Going to other churches, it seems like there was more of an opportunity, just kind of like you could sit on the back pew and just chill and go home, and you got fed from the pulpit or whatever, some sort of wisdom or whatever. But in Mormonism, everybody is given a job or what they call a calling. Everybody has a calling in the church. And so you have responsibilities that you have to fulfill. And then you're also invited to speak in church. So probably once a year, you're the person at the pulpit, giving a talk to the whole congregation. And so it's very involved. And then you're also assigned other families in the congregation that you, on kind of a regular monthly, or they've changed some of this over the years, but during my height of involvement, it's like monthly, you were supposed to go visit this family and make sure they're doing okay, teach them some sort of spiritual lesson. If they needed help, like mowing their lawn, you were the person that they would call, and you without any question, that's what you do. You just be like, oh, Sister so-and-so, this old lady that I'm assigned to visit, she can't mow her lawn. So I'm there, every week or two, mowing her lawn for her.
That's nice because here's the thing. As you were talking, I was thinking this. I'm like, well, there's a duality to this, right? Where on one sense, you are fostering community, and that seems like a really nice thing. On the other side, there is a like slightly sinister edge to it in which it's reinforcing certain things that I'm sure maybe are not. I'm walking around exactly what I want to say here because I'm not sure. But like, I'm sure there are certain negative parts that reinforces, or that like, I don't know. You tell me what.
No, you're exactly right on. So yeah, the community aspect's really nice and incredible. Have, and I still have friends that they'll kind of like, check in on me on occasion. It's like, hey, like we had I think it was just last week, there was a tornado. And and it did some damage in town. I don't think the tornado like really landed in town here, but still like there are trees that were taken down and stuff. And so someone checked in on, my family and said, just by text, just saying, hey, how are you guys doing? And so that aspect of it's nice that if, even though I no longer attend or am like integrated, I'm still, like, people still know me, and if we ever had like serious problems, they would be here in a heartbeat to help me out. And so that aspect's really nice. But yeah, the flip side of it is that as you're fulfilling all these obligations, part of those obligations are that you're talking the talk that the church wants you to talk. You're not teaching anything that goes contrary to, the official teachings of the church. And so there's a lot of, sort of like a culture of, we have, there's someone always who's above you in the hierarchy. Even if you ascended up the hierarchy, you became like a bishop, in the local congregation, there's always someone who's called to be the bishop. And this isn't a professional thing. They're just, they could be a lawyer by day and, a bishop on the weekend and also in the evenings, perhaps. And so, whoever's above you in the hierarchy, the bishop, there's someone above him in the hierarchy, from a different congregation who's like in a position that's over several congregations, and on and on and on. And so unless you're like the, like president of the church, that's also, called the prophet of the church at the time, there's always someone above you that you can't contradict and that you can't, disobey. There's very strong sense of, sort of leadership, hierarchy, because the person above you is in contact with God, and so, to defy what they say is to defy God. And so there's not a lot of autonomy to think for yourself, to have, like sort of your own spiritual, sort of inklings or whatever. It's very much prescripted for you.
Yeah. Okay. A couple things. One, when I think of Mormonism, I think about how American, obviously it is, but like how intertwined it is with the spirit of America, not just the fact that it was founded here, how the kind of, I don't know, I want to say manifest destiny, but they're all of the, I was just trying to find a different word than I keep using the word capitalism, but like the kind of just like, I was thinking of Mitt Romney and I was thinking of like the things that Bain Capital has done, which is like basically like buy a company, put a bunch of debt on it, sell off what they can, like strip it for parts, and make a profit that way, and then they destroy, like, I think it was like KB Toys. I mean, there's a lot of them, but I think like it was either Toys R Us or KB. Like, they've done this to a lot of things, and I'm like, I was trying to put together in my head, and obviously this is a human thing in general in terms of religion, but like the contradictions that are kind of inherent in all religions that purport to follow, whether it's Jesus, whether it is the Old Testament, whatever, where there are these like rules about morality that are pretty strict and are pointing one towards what we can all call a good life without having to like define good. Don't kill people, don't steal, all that kind of stuff. And yet how these things get corrupted once they are in practice, whether it's Catholicism and all the popes that did all fucked up things or whatever, right? And I'm kind of curious how you worked this out. I know this is a long preface, but I'm like, as a kid, or as you are kind of like thinking about Mormonism, or like as you are kind of moving into a different phase of your life, however you would characterize it, because I assume you are, the way you've said it, you're no longer Mormon. How are you working these things out with the teachings versus seeing how it's actually practiced in the world?
A lot of it comes down to sort of, kind of redefining things in certain ways by saying, like, okay, and I'm trying to think of some of, because I'm no longer kind of in that phase. So I'm trying to think of some of the terms that I would have used at the time, and it's kind of like, okay, a good word is sort of, like the culture of the church versus the doctrine of the church. Okay. So that's like one way to kind of separate it out in your mind and kind of be like, okay, the doctrine of the church has to be from God, or the church ceases to be divine. But the culture of the church is allowed to be different, because the culture of the church is, just people kind of interpreting the doctrine in various ways and how they apply it to their own lives, or to this decade, or to this moment in history or whatever. And so that's one way to be like, okay. And a lot of this is like really, sort of like intense mental work, mm-hmm. that you have to be like, okay, well, I don't like that the culture of the church is currently, let's just say, not very pro LGBTQ. But if I go to like and you have to kind of separate, like what certain people have recently said within the church, and say, well, this current leader, what he's saying is reflecting more of the culture of the church and not the original doctrine of the church. You can't find what he's explicitly saying in scripture. And so, you kind of do that sort of thing where you're kind of like giving leniency to whatever's currently happening. Mm-hmm. And, and these are really difficult, sort of like intellectual, things to kind of piece together. And and that's one of the tricky things, is that you could spend a lot of time, trying to reconcile what you think is actual truth and what currently, the average member of the faith thinks is true.
So I guess then, how did you start to move away from this? Like, what was the trajectory for you to kind of break out of this thinking?
Well, I've been thinking about this recently because I think it was just a week ago, I released a song called Lift. And it's the second song that's been released of a 4-song EP that's coming out next month. And so this song Lift, it's from a very early childhood experience, or multiple experiences. And it's really an early childhood relationship that I had with an uncle of mine. And so I had this uncle, and I don't remember the exact age that I am at the time, but I'm in grade school. I'm at I don't know how young in grade school I am. And my uncle, who is closer in age to me than to my mom, he's just a very young sibling. Again, Mormons tend to have large families that span, multiple decades. And so he was closer in age to me. He was probably, I'm guessing he was in his upper teens at the time.
Mm.
And so he comes and he lives with us. And he's totally into heavy metal.
Okay.
And it exposes me to just this sort of other way of perceiving the world. It's like it's this completely different culture and I was already, interested in music and had kind of gravitated towards music is really interesting. And for whatever reason, music resonated with me. But at the time, my main musical exposure was whatever records my parents had and, whatever was on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
And probably, just sort of like really standard top 40 radio. But my uncle, moves in with us, and he has all these records. They're just this completely alien thing to me. And
what decade is this?
This is the 80s.
It's the 80s. So we're talking,
yeah.
What kind of metal? Are we talking like Judas Priest? Are we talking?
Yeah, exactly. Judas Priest, Ozzy Osbourne. And the video that we put out last week with the single is footage of Ozzy Osbourne doing a performance in 1981. Just kind of like it's slowed down, so it's kind of more ethereal. and the music that I'm creating is not heavy metal at all.
Right.
It's more just sort of a sort of indie type of song production. But anyway, yeah. So yeah, it's like Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Ozzy Osbourne, and I'm not suggesting that these things were like radically removed from mainstream. This is part of mainstream culture at the time, but to me, this is like a whole new thing. And it's also very transgressive. Even though this stuff is pretty big and pretty mainstream at the time, it still has, purposely has this sort of transgressive element to it. The way they're dressing, the way, the production of the music is, kind of heavy, hard rock or whatever. Yeah. And so it's purposely, trying to be something that's a little, off the, sort of like gentle, this is how people are supposed to behave in society kind of thing. And so and I didn't realize it at the time. And it's actually only reflecting on this song more recently that I wrote, that I came to the realization that, this is kind of like my first idea that, there's the Mormonism that my parents brought me up in, but then there's my uncle who's part of this other sort of culture that doesn't really align necessarily with Mormonism. And so it taught me, potentially, that there's nuance, that my culture doesn't have to be just Mormonism. It can, I can blend other cultures into this, or at least I can kind of toggle between them. Maybe they can't really be integrated. It's not like you're going to go to the Mormon church and all of a sudden there's like, heavy metal, band playing there. I maybe in some, like really liberal congregation there might be, but, for the most part, those two worlds aren't going to really combine. But for my uncle, they did. And so, and it also kind of introduced me into, just the idea of like different music subcultures. And so from there, I got into, sort of like more, sort of like indie alternative, college radio type stuff, new wave and post-punk and all the other stuff that was happening in the 80s, that I kind of discovered, on my own, or through other people at my high school or whatever the case may be. And so I kind of, by the time I'm in my teens, I'm balancing these two different cultures and worlds. And I did that for a long time, and being very involved in music and the arts, I kept running up against different things that just really didn't fit with Mormonism. But I learned to, kind of separate them out. It's like, oh, well, art, maybe, religion has this pure thing at its core, and then art has something pure at its core. And so to me, those were the same, but the culture that developed out of them were very distinct and different. But to me, at the core, there was still sort of this pure element that I was seeking after. And so then to give another example, it's like, going back to the LGBTQ thing, one of the very first projects I did in the late 90s was a album that I did with a queer artist. And this artist, and I'm just going to refer to them as they, because they actually prefer that you like alternate the pronouns, switch from he to she back and forth. But it's in active conversation. If I'm writing, I can do it, but in active conversation, I have a really hard time. So this artist I did the project with, they were coming from such an alien culture, to where I was coming from. But I instantly had to grapple with the fact that the music that they were producing, I thought was, really interesting. And there was something in there that, and this is something that in the arts you come across, I came across this again and again and again, that even though, I was taught, that form of sexuality was, not good or whatever the case may be. I found, every friendship I made, with people from LGBTQ communities was just beautiful, and in many ways I thought, oh, in many ways, this person is more loving and caring than many of the people that I'm rubbing shoulders with in a church community. And so, there's continues to be this sort of frictions. It's like, I see a lot of goodness outside of this church Mormon culture. And, how do I reconcile that? That's something that I grappled with for a long time.
Yeah. Another thing I was thinking of was this idea of calling is instilled in you.
Yeah.
When you're younger. And I'm wondering how that mutated as you grapple with these kind of contradictions.
You mean like the calling within the church?
Yeah, because I'm thinking this is my thinking. Tell me how accurate this is. I was thinking this, when you're young, you get instilled with this idea that there is some purpose, right? Or there's something you are supposed to do, right? Yeah. And I was thinking this like, oh, what if like as you are, again, I don't know how to characterize. This is why I'm being so kind of like, weird with my language, because I don't know how to characterize it. Basically, like as you left the faith, as your faith lessened, however you want to characterize it, right? As you are, I don't even know. I said leaving Mormonism. You said you're still on the rolls. I don't know what you practice still, but like as you are becoming more secular, let's just say, or moving into those worlds, I would think that like that doesn't like stop or end or dampen this idea in you, right? It doesn't dampen this calling, but I would think that it would mutate into something else. And I'm wondering if that calling then became again, this is so like linear, but I wonder if like it then like was whatever you were called to do when you were younger, if that became a more artistic impulse, or if that calling was an artistic calling in the beginning, and that's kind of like started pushing you in that direction in the first place. How would you characterize it? I know I'm like babbling a little bit. I'm just trying to like figure out a way to like.
Yeah, I mean, I think where you're going is that, I mean, within the church at any like specific moment, you have like a responsibility, which is your calling in the church. But on a larger scale, I think where you're going is that, tied to that potentially is that you potentially have like life callings, like I'm
an existential one.
My life calling is that I'm supposed to be, like a good father, an artist, a good member of the, maybe, like Mitt Romney felt that his calling was to be, like a good politician. He probably thought that was, coming from Mormonism, he probably thought that was what God wanted him to become. And that's very much ingrained in Mormonism, that there's like purpose to everything. And so, so I think, going to your question, I think, my like more sort of overarching calling or purpose in life changed as I felt more friction with the institution. And one way that it changed that potentially allowed me to stay within it for a lot longer than maybe I should have, was that initially, Mormons are very missionary focused, or proselytizing focused, that, we need to convert the whole world to the one true religion. And so when I start thinking about being an artist, like as a teen or in my 20s or whatever, I'm thinking, oh yeah, I could be, this artist that helps other people see the light of Mormonism or whatever. But then as, more dissonance or friction occurs, then it's like my view shifts, that it's like, oh, maybe I'm supposed to help people within this institution. The more I recognize that the institution is kind of in a weird state, help people in this institution realize that, that there's something more, than what the institution is offering at this point in time. That maybe at some point, the religion was pure, but it's, kind of in a rough state at this point. And I think, for a while, my wife and I, we stayed in it with the idea that, well, there should be someone in the congregation that's more liberal, that's more open-minded about certain things, so that as other people realize that, maybe, that there's someone else there, to kind of support other people who might be having similar thoughts as we're having. And so that it doesn't become, just sort of this monolithic conservative, thing that it actually is. But, but there are, and I knew from just, the internet helps a lot with this, that I became aware, from the internet that different congregations were very different. So if you went to a congregation in Boston, for example, they had very, sort of like liberal, intellectual, congregations, and so there were these little pockets, and we didn't necessarily live in that kind of pocket. Our pocket was potentially a little neutral, because, there is a university here and there are professors within the congregation, but yeah, the calling does shift over time to what you think, like your purpose is, within this, and as an artist, as someone who's participating in a community, it's kind of, continually shifting.
Yeah. Okay. The other thing I was thinking of, and again, I'll babble, and then you tell me if there's any accuracy to what I'm thinking, or if I'm totally off the map. Okay. Here's the line of thinking. I was thinking about Mormonism, and of course this is before we started talking, and the focus on business, right? And I was thinking of illegal art, and I was thinking of these kind of like themes that wended their way through the 80s and 90s. And a theme that keeps coming up on this show that I was steeped in is the idea in indie rock of not selling out and of being not against business, but against like changing your aesthetic being in order to sell more records or to appeal to an A&R guy from Geffen, whatever, right? The other thing I was thinking of in this was how kind of like postmodernism goes in two directions. And the one direction is play, right? The idea of like Negative Land and the KLF and what Greg, let's talk, let girl talk, right? And a lot of the music that you champion and that you make, right? There's this idea of play. We're going to play with culture. We're going to rearrange it. We're going to like, it gets even into like, it doesn't have to be like dealing with samples. Like I remember like there's some Destroyer song where like he references like a Bowie song. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize you could, like, I knew you could do that in literature, but you can also do that in music. You can like reference some other song and, kind of this idea of like pointing back at different parts of culture. And then there's this other part of this feeling. And I think that, again, that's linked to this business idea. And this is why this is all swirling around, but I don't have a fully thought out thesis. But like, you've got this other that like kind of finds its realization in this whole AI scam that's going on right now, where it's just like, oh, well, we're just going to steal. This is not an artistic. There's no artistic impulse. There's no aesthetic feeling. We're just going to steal stuff like to create our large language model. We're just going to steal people's things, and we have enough money to do that, and you can't stop us. So there's these two impulses that I think have to be in some way swirling around you as you are kind of deciding to make music, deciding to found a label. And I'm kind of curious if that, did any of that make sense? Am I just like, kind of like...
Yeah, I mean, it all makes sense. I'm trying to keep track of all the ideas that you kind of like bounced around on.
So did it make sense? And B, does it resonate with you? Was any of that in you as you are kind of like deciding to make art? How much of it is a decision? How much of it, again, is a calling, I suppose, that you just feel from the inside?
Well, I mean, let's go back to kind of the first thing that you centered on, the whole idea of like the indie value system of not selling out. That really appealed to me, because that's a very pure stance to take. And so even though you wouldn't think, oh, well, Mormonism and indie rock, those don't seem like they have anything in common, but they're both, like in their own terms trying to find something pure. And so that's and then going into, like the sampling, I became very convinced of the idea and the philosophy, and this was the whole philosophy of the label, was that, all music is created from other music. If you're, you don't have to sample to do it. Nobody's operating in some sort of, like vacuum.
Yeah.
And so this became like a very, like strong, sort of truism that I thought not only is all music created from other music, but the technological means to to do that, through sampling technology is creating a new art form. And at the time, in the late 90s, when I'm starting the record label in the early 2000s, I'm thinking, this is the future.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that point, by the time you get to the late 90s, early 2000s, all of what and this, I think this still plays out to 2026 now, is that all the major genres exist at that point. If you think country, hip hop, rock, jazz, maybe I'm wrong about this, but, and I think I argue with my students about this sometimes, but can you think of like a genre that's as big as those genres that's come about in the last, 20 years?
The best thought I had was that we're still in this postmodern phase, this kind of like interregnum where they're just crossing over. Like,
exactly.
And there's figuring out like Lil Nas X, I was thinking of, where I'm just like, oh, well, you've got country and hip hop kind of like combining there.
Exactly.
Right?
And that's exactly where sampling was going. And so in starting the label and embracing this thing, of appropriation and combining things together, creating hybrids, I thought of sampling. And then later, when I kind of get over the idea that everything should be sampling, because I was definitely thinking that for a while, everything should just be samples. There's like so many kinds of music that could come from this, then could come from, iterating on rock over and over and over again. And so I definitely saw it as, oh, this is the future. This is something pure and new. And this is the genre for the next decade or 2 decades or whatever. And it's kind of played out. And what you're talking about is kind of the logical extension of it, that it wasn't just sampling. It was, actually just the hybridization of every genre into like new forms of, sort of genreless music or multi-genre music, postmodernism, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, so that definitely had an appeal. And there's something that, really felt right and good about it.
Mm-hmm.
And like it was. And also I think, I wasn't thinking of this at the time, but, like in retrospect, I was potentially also probably driven to the idea that this is a form of art that's, persecuted. This is a form of art that's sued out of existence. And so that probably appealed to me, coming from a religion that very much views itself as a persecuted religion.
Oh, interesting. Oh, that is interesting. Because what I thought of, and again, this is just so basic and linear, but I'm like, oh, I wonder if in a sense this is a reaction to that malignant strain of business, which is just like I also thought about like the fact that Napster shows up around this time, right?
Uh-huh.
Maybe a couple years later. But that in one sense, yay. I like that, like, in my most broke years, I could still download some music that I wanted to hear. And now that I have a little bit of disposable income, I can buy those records. But, like, in those times when I had no money, yay. But also, like, that's the first shot across the bow of, like, well, we can just steal stuff. We can just steal people's music, and they can't do anything about it. And we can not just steal it, but, like, us as a tech company can make money off of that theft.
Yeah. Well, and before the tech companies like sweep in and like change everything, there was in the 90s this very utopian view of where the internet was going.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that I think is important too, that leading up to Napster, the idea is already there that this technology is going to create the possibility that you don't have to go out and spend, $10, $15, whatever it was at the time to buy a record. It could all just exist and could be freely available. And so I think that's, an interesting extension of it as well, that, the utopian view of the internet obviously didn't pan out. But in the 90s is very much a strong thread. I imagine if you go back to like Wired magazine from that decade, it's very, Wired magazine still sort of airs on that sort of, technology is great and technology, has a lot of things to offer us. But even more so probably in the 90s that it was probably an idea that was pretty ubiquitous at the time.
Yeah. So, but the thing is, it's less of a reaction to the kind of business strain and more of a kind of finding constants within what you thought was the positive bend of Mormonism.
Yeah. Can you rephrase that? I'm sorry. I didn't quite, I didn't quite catch if there was a question in there or not.
I guess what I was saying was the idea of sample-based music, of the postmodern reference, of taking culture and reconfiguring it from an artistic impulse. That came less out of a reaction to the kind of like business malignant thievery end. Like in my mind, it was like, oh, well, you saw this strain of culture kind of like coming, maybe not out of Mormonism, but there being some kind of consonance between that and Mormonism, and you were reacting to it like, oh, I'm going to go in the opposite direction. But it was less of that. It was less of a reaction and more of like, oh, there are positive things in Mormonism, and I find some consonance with some aesthetic consonance with those positive things in Mormonism.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely at the time I was finding harmony between these apparently, very disparate things. But in my mind, it was all, oh, there's goodness in this and there's goodness in that. And in all cases, I'm just searching for, the purity at the center of all of it.
I love that. That's a great, I love that as a, like the kind of spirit, both aesthetic and ethical spirit to come out of, as opposed to, in my mind, I'm always like, well, everyone's always reacting to the bad thing and they're pushing against that. Cause that was a lot of my life, was like, I would see something like that I thought sucked. And I'm like, again, I don't think it was conscious, but I think I was just like kicked against, like that, like you're at the edge of the pool and you're like doing a lap and you push off against the edge of the pool to, that was me for a lot of my life, was like, well, I think that thing sucks, so I'm going to push against it.
Yeah. But yeah. I mean, I think a lot of that does come from, Mormon upbringing. Mormon upbringing is really, you're striving for perfection. Perfectionism is kind of a inherent goal within Mormonism. While you're simultaneously taught, oh, you can't become perfect, but you should do everything you can to get as close as you can to perfection, and then God will make up the difference for you. But yeah, there's definitely a striving, and it's one of those things that, like, I'm very conscious and aware that even though I've left the institutional faith, it's like, oh, these value systems, I can't get rid of them. They're just so ingrained. It's like, even, and you see this with like, there's a pretty strong online ex-Mormon community that's very sort of bitter, and I don't think of myself as aligned with that, as being bitter or against the church in any way. I left because I saw value in finally distancing myself fully from it. But I also valued the experiences I had within it, and I still respect friends and family that are in it. To each their own, and to everyone's on their own journey kind of thing. Mentality is where I land. But I recognize, I'm very conscious of, as far away as I get from it, mm-hmm. It's still inside of me.
Yeah.
Like, there's certain structures, there's certain ways of thinking that I'll probably never shake, and I don't know whether that's good or bad. That's just, at this point in my life, I can't like completely rewire my brain.
It seems like a very nice place to end. Matthew, okay. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah. Thank you, Andy. This is very, very interesting conversation. I had no idea this is where it'd go.
Yeah, me neither. I had some swirling, non-formed thoughts, and you put them together.
Okay.
So thank you. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.